Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's program, Curator Talk, Coins, Ritual, and Cultural Exchange in Africa, presented in conjunction with the Fowler Museum at UCLA's current exhibition, Exchange. My name is Hannah Yu, and I'm the Curator of Public Programs here at the Fowler. We're so glad to have you with us today. This afternoon, we're joined by Exchange co-curator Carlee S. Forbes and Professor Andrew Apter from UCLA's Department of History and Anthropology for a conversation on the role of coins, tokens, and counters in African cultural and ritual systems. Carlee S. Forbes is Associate Curator of African and Oceanic Art at the Baltimore Museum of Art and holds a Ph.D. in art history from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. A former member of the Fowler's Mellon-funded research team, her work in Exchange explores how everyday objects reflect belief systems, memory, and global exchange. Andrew Apter is a professor of history and anthropology at UCLA whose work bridges philosophy, sociocultural anthropology, and African studies with a focus on West Africa and the Black Atlantic. He is the author of Black Critics and Kings, The Pan-African Nation, and Beyond Words. His recent projects, Oduduwa's Chain and History in the Dungeon, explore ritual archives and the historical dynamics of slavery and capitalism. Before we begin, a quick reminder. Please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit questions. You can also upvote others you'd like to hear answered. We'll get to as many as we can. And now I'll turn it over to Carlee and Andrew.
Thanks, Hannah. Hi, Andy. Thanks everybody for being here today. So we're going to start with just a quick overview of Exchange, the ideas that went behind organizing it, a quick little preview, encourage you to come visit the show before it closes November 2nd, and then really to dive into a discussion with Professor Apter here. Let's see if I can get the slideshow going, about a few things that we couldn't include in the exhibition because you only have so much space and labels that you can do. So why not have an online program to expand all those things? But first, a quick overview of Exchange and the ideas behind it. So we have here an installation view. It's in Intersections, the long-term gallery at the Fowler, with several installation views here. But the goal of this show was to really focus on items that are former coinage. They are tokens, they are minted things. We intentionally decided to not include things, other kinds of money that might be, paper money or cowries or manillas, which I think we'll touch on today, these other kinds of currency, but to really try to keep it focused. And the idea that these coins, these minted coins, these pressed metal items could be exchanged and what that can show us when they are then reused and attached to objects. So that was really the basis of the show. And then searching across Fowler collecting areas, looking at items from across Asia, the Americas, and Africa to really see how these minted metals and tokens can take on all these different kinds of meanings in different contexts, but it really becomes this very global phenomenon. So we have here, let's see. Oh, here's some more install shots. It's a really amazingly designed show. So hats off to our design team here. So in addition to showing global histories, cross sections of the collection, the show is also about close looking. So you can see a lot of these really fantastic images on the walls of the gallery that show these really detailed views of the minted coins and tokens, really inviting you to look closely. One goal that I always have as a curator is to ask us to slow down and to really look at the things that are in front of us. But life is so busy, so fast. We're always staring at our screens. And one of the great things about going to a actual museum is that you get to see real life objects in front of you. So why don't we slow down, ask questions about them, look deeply. And I think that what we've done here with the design helps us to facilitate that kind of close looking. Also help us look at close looking. We have some in-gallery resources, kind of a seek and find where you can identify some of the coins. The images are to the best of our ability the same as what are produced on the objects. There might be certain variations in terms of dates and the different mints, but we tried our best, as well as a link here to a digital resource through story maps where you can explore more. So the show is organized into four sections, really looking not necessarily at the physical coins themselves and the moment in which they were produced and moved around, but rather what happens when they're reused. So the first section, materiality and function, looks at them when they take on a real practical purpose, like buttons, or in this case here, in the picture that's surrounded by the blue circle, those are the weight on a drop spindle used to spin yarn. In the section Wealth and Beauty, we have coins that are serving real physical adornment as well as in cases of dowries, often for marriage. In the section mediators, we see how coins take a spiritual role, and there's a great prior online program with Patrick Polk where he talks about a mask with a dime that's embedded on the mask that is in that section. And then historical traces, the last section, really looks at the movement of the coins and how we can trace global histories of actual exchange, not the exchange, former change through the things that are the coins that are attached to the objects. So these really complex systems of trade, of taxation, of various kinds of oppression through the coins that are attached to objects. So it really helps us to take a multitude of look at coinage, at minted metals, to see cross sections of humanity interacting with each other at different moments in time. But like I said, we're trying to stretch over all of Fowler's collecting area, which is a large swath of the world, over quite a bit of time, which means that we're really not going into too much depth on things for each of what's in the exhibition. And so for this program, the goal was to invite a scholar to be in conversation about their own research, so where we can look more in depth about some of the themes that are presented in exchange, a bit more in detail. So I will hand the mic over, proverbial mic over to Professor Apter, and we'll set it off from there. So thanks for being here and discussing coins with me, exchange.
Well, thank you,
There you are.
Carlee, and thank you, Hannah, for putting this program together and also putting the exhibit together. It really is an extraordinary and an enjoyable exhibit. It's one of the kinds of exhibits that's small and yet, like an acorn, it contains a tree inside of it. I mean, it's really expansive, but it doesn't wear you out. So I don't think it's open for more than a week and a half. So um,
Right. November 2nd. So we'll have all of our online participants visit by then.
very good, very good. Okay, well, what I'm going to do is only in a few cases speak to a few of the images in the actual exhibit. Rather, I think I'm going to um, show you some of the properties of money in its material and symbolic dimensions that I've encountered conducting ethnographic work among Yoruba in Southwest Nigeria, focusing on ritual and politics. And that was my first long field study that I did when I was just cutting
Hmm.
my teeth as an anthropologist. So this was like the long apprenticeship that one goes through in shedding one's own culture and acquiring another one, and then sort of trying to figure out who you are after all of that. But it's a very enriching experience. And I think one of the major ideas I want to get across is that exchange doesn't occur um, in isolated events. It does punctuate something of a larger system, and that is a system of circulation. So what I'm going to ask us to do is think a little bit systematically about what unites, let's say, these four aspects of the exhibit: materiality and function, wealth and beauty, mediators, historical traces. These are all linked together in in circulation systems that all societies have in order to reproduce and transform themselves, basically through the economy. But what I want us to do, and what anthropologists often do, is challenge the limits of what we think of as the economy. It certainly has an economic utility function to it. That is a primary function of economics. But
Hmm.
we also have economies that convert one form of value into another, and that happens through exchange. So I'm looking at the power of those conversions and even the magic of those conversions. So I think I'm going to share my screen now and jump into a PowerPoint if you'll bear with me.
Yeah, of course. And I love that you're highlighting that the one of the great things about this show is that every object could be in multiple sections. And it was a real kind of mind game to figure out which one it best fit in, or it could, and sometimes it's a question of, which case did it fit in? It's a logistical spatial issue, but a lot of it is these real intellectual battles with, it could be a functional thing, it could be a spirituality mediator, it could be an economic exchange, and where do you find which story do you want to highlight at this given time? So I appreciate that you're drawing attention to the fact that it is all kind of relative.
Well, great. And it also, in many cases, overlaps. So some of these objects fulfill several of, or two of the functions or more. And that's part of the exciting, one of the exciting things about trying to figure out an analytical schema and something that unites accurately, and reality overlaps with other realities. I mean, there are degrees of overlap and underlap that I think are part of any analysis and interpretation. So I'm going to be looking at what I'm emphasizing is currencies of circulation and conversion. How does one form of value convert into another? And also, I like the notion of exchange as drawing attention to what happens when a money form or an object or a currency, a coin, is withdrawn from circulation. Because when you withdraw a currency or a coin from circulation, it becomes something, one of its other aspects gets foregrounded and emphasized. So let me get a little bit into that. Um, Okay, so money as a medium of exchange. We all grow up pretty much learning that in primary school. Money has to be durable enough to not be destroyed, and it has to be uniform enough so that it can allow uh, equivalent units of value to to be estimated and then quantified. How much does something cost? How much will you pay for it? I want to start by looking at the two faces, the heads and tails of money in effect. Just flip a coin. But I'm going to look at it.
Let's try to get every single pun that you can squeeze out of this talk.
Okay, I won't punish you too much. All right.
No, I really challenge you. I think it's great.
Okay, okay. Anyway, the two faces of money. And one thing we can draw attention to is it's historically been associated with material value, understood, especially in that period of pre-capitalist mercantile exchange, as having intrinsic value. And this is going to invoke the relationship of a slippery relationship between bullion and currency, or bullion and money. Bullion, of course, would be the metal out of which the currency is formed, but then the currency can be distinguished from bullion by bearing images, by telling you how much value the coin has, 5 shillings, uh, 1 pence, 20 shillings, $3. Um, and uh, and then the assumption being that there's a relationship between the value of the coin, its intrinsic value, and then its sign value, the image value, the symbolic value, which has sometimes been called extrinsic value. Intrinsic value being the bullion value, extrinsic being the transformed, what it looks like from the outside. And this, of course, in economics has been distinguished as fiat currency. A fiat currency is anything a sovereign says it is to be money. And in fact, we now know that money need not have any relationship um, to material value in its coinage. Um, Obviously, the U.S. Monetary system was tied to to the silver dollar and gold bullion for a long time, and then we went off the gold standard. No reason to be on it. and yet a lot of confidence got shaken. And even in these uncertain economic times that we're in now, uh, with tariffs that have been unprecedented since the 1920s, being what they are, we're seeing a lot of people invest in gold, and the value of gold is now shooting up again. But what are it actually has no intrinsic value. It's a good metal to work with. It's pretty, sounds good when you make a flute out of it, but it has a market value, and that's about determined by supply and demand. So we're already getting into the fuzzy edges of these categories, but I do want to
Mhm.
come back to this notion that money has a material dimension to it, as the exhibit mentions, materiality and function, and it has a symbolic or sign value. Now, one kind of tricky, fascinating um, third factor in this is what I call truth value. And that's what philosophers call truth value when they're working out logical propositions, what is true and what is false. Um, and I want to emphasize that coinage historically, when it's linked to a notion of intrinsic value of the metal, of the bullion, it has involved a very important relationship between the symbolic sign value and the material value. When it is linked to the symbol of a sovereign, it can be a king, it can be a republic like the French Republic, but the nation's or the kingdom's credibility, and that also extends to getting credit, the credibility of a currency rests on its truth value. And I want to give you an example of how that has been violated historically. So in the late 17th century, in the 1690s, um, England, it wasn't Great Britain yet, England uh, developed the Bank of England to expand its credit instruments, but it went through a very heated debate in Parliament over the silver content of its currency. And what was happening in England at the time, I don't know if you've heard of clipping, when you look at some coins, and even Roman coins have this, a little bit of the metal's been clipped out. And what clipping is when the coins circulate throughout the nation, people will clip a little piece of the silver or gold off of it, and yet it will still be used as a currency up until a
Hmm.
certain point. This is called debasement. This is when they said the currencies are being debased. But why do you think the penalty for clipping, even if it's a teeny little piece, in England at that time was the death penalty? The death penalty. You would be hanged for clipping a coin. And the reason given is that the clipping is basically turning the symbol of the sovereign into a liar. So it
Hmm.
becomes an act of treason. So clipping is an act of treason. So what we see right here is that coinage, in terms of its intrinsic value, its symbolic value, is linked in very closely to sovereignty. That's why you have so many kings and presidents on coins and bills. And also, it comes down to trust. Another example of this, veering more into the bullion domain, is I'm working currently, my current research is going back historically into the uh, 17th and 18th century Atlantic slave trade and looking at the forms of exchange that existed between European slavers and the so-called merchant African princes who sold enslaved captives to the Europeans. And for various areas and various times, gold dust, Ashanti gold dust in Ghana, on the coast of Ghana, was used as the preferred currency for buying and selling enslaved human commodities. And there were certain slave forts that that became notorious for using what was called crocra, debased gold dust. It was gold dust that had bits of brass and even clay in it. And
Hmm.
what we're seeing here is in that moment, is a kind of separation from a mercantile notion of value, which is value that is embedded in the materiality of the coinage, or value that is accumulated, gold accumulated by a national economy. And the another indicator of a national economy, which Adam Smith would call later on the basically what became the gross domestic product. It's the productivity of a nation. Now, Krokra worked as a currency precisely because it was drawing on the symbolic trust in using that currency as a redeemable currency. It didn't matter if it had more or less gold dust in it in today's economic understanding. But back then, it was regarded as a kind of moral violation of kind of diluting your gold dust. And so the traders there were punished. So this tension between money as a symbol of exchange value, as a token of exchange value, and money as an object of a thing of value, um, changes historically as the economies change.
Mm.
I also want to point out, using the theme of exchange, X means out of in Latin, so it's out of exchange, that money goes into and out of circulation. Um, we were once remodeling a basement, and before we moved to LA, my partner and I, we in Chicago, we remodeled a basement, and we had a really fabulous Uruguayan craftsman doing the work. And every time he would raise the price, and I might complain a little bit, and his work was fantastic. He used to say, but Andrew, he said, you know, money has no value unless you spend it. So he was encouraging me to give my money value. In any case, he's right. Money has no value until you spend it. I mean, it does and it doesn't. It has value on an index, depending on what the S&P is doing or depending on what the interest rate is. But in effect, it's a social product, and it doesn't really work unless it circulates. So when you take money out of circulation, what are you doing? You're drawing attention to its non-monetary functions. And this is where the aesthetic value of its symbolic value, sign value, becomes foregrounded. And that's what we see when we look at works of art. I mean, decorations, decorative art, whether it's body ornament or whether it's incorporated into textiles or just objects, utilitarian objects or ritual objects. This is when a different kind of value emerges from money. And that's what I love about the exhibit, because you really see examples of this in all of the display cases. So sign value becomes foregrounded when taken out of circulation, but then it gets converted into aesthetic value as a work of art, as part of a work of art. So money has this capacity also to convert into other forms of value. This is a little bit abstract, and it's something that Karl Marx, even though he may not be considered a real economist in terms of economic um, analysis of markets and of rates of exchange, and he nonetheless really captured the kind of the mystery of what happens when you exchange money for a commodity. Well, the value form shifts from the money form into the commodity form. What does that mean? That's what Marx worked out in his 3 volumes of Capital. And it's not easy. But it's not a coincidence that he called that mysterious process the fetishism of commodities.
Mm.
It's mysterious, it's magical. And what I want to do is, without worrying too much about the deeper metaphysical aspects of that argument, what he himself called metaphysical subtleties and theological niceties, I just want us to think about how money takes on a kind of magic. Money talks. That kind of is a simple, it doesn't really talk, but that's simply an expression that means if you money's persuasive. If you want to bribe somebody, if you want to impress somebody, if you want, you spend, you invest and then you get some action. But it also, there are divination systems among the Yoruba that use cowrie shells, which are currency. They were a currency in the era of Atlantic slavery, and they talk when the diviner throws them down. He's been trained how to listen to the cowrie shells by reading the patterns they form on the divination board. Another one is money begets money. That's in Plato's Republic. Money begets
Mm.
money? What do you mean? Does that mean that if you stare long enough at a coin, it'll divide into two and they have children? Kind of, because that's interest-bearing money. money begets money as interest. And those are kind of magical properties as well as they are um, scientifically or analytically understood economic properties. Now, I want to draw attention to a couple of examples that represent two ways of thinking about the magical qualities of money when it's used in an art or utilitarian or ritual object. One is what used to be called sympathetic magic. There are two kinds, sympathetic magic and contagion magic. Sympathetic magic is when, let's say, I want to create rain in a dry spell, and I puff on a sacred pipe and I blow smoke in a way that resembles clouds. And then I pray over the smoke, and woe and behold, clouds form and rain falls. That's a Hopi form, a Native American form of making rain. That's sympathetic magic because the symbolic similarity, it's like an analogy or a metaphor between the smoke that is blown and the cloud that contains raindrops, can be activated and manipulated according to the logic of the magic. Contagion magic is when it's contact magic. It's as if, well, I don't want to be touched with somebody who has a disease because I might catch that disease. But it also refers to um, people's fear of touching, let's say, a homeless person, and oh my God, I'm going to get rabies or something. But it's also, so it's based on the actual properties of a substance when it comes into contact with your body, your skin, or something like
Mm.
that. And actually, the two examples I have from the exhibit, they're more on the contagion scale than the sympathetic scale. I didn't do my due diligence and find a clear example of that in the exhibit. But let me just show you, give some examples of the um, how sign value and sovereignty connect in coinage. Here we have for
Mhm.
the exhibit wealth and beauty. These are coins that are incorporated into a necklace, and they're incorporated in the part of the British Empire um, in India, of course, the Raj, that this would be in the early 20th century. This is King George VI. But uh, but this coinage, it's very interesting. If you look at the third coin here in particular, um, whoops, it's not. Anyway, it says George VI, King, and then space Emperor. So here we have a kind of symbolic um, extension of kingship, national kingship, to imperial emperor. So the relationship between the nation of Great Britain and the British Empire is encapsulated in this coin. And again, this relationship between money and sovereignty uh, is related to the credibility of a national economy and the credibility of the empire that it supports, that serves it. And here's an example from a Guatemalan mask, 20th century. Now, this is interesting because the coin is hidden. This is like the hidden magic of money. If you're looking at the dancer wearing this mask from the outside, you will never see this coin. You can see how it's embedded here in the inside of the mask, where it's going to be touching
Mhm.
the forehead of the dancer. So here we have this kind of power of coinage that is being activated through and is this the dime you were referring to, Carlee? The 10 cent?
Yeah.
Look at that. I didn't even
Mhm.
realize it was an American coin until you mentioned this.
Yeah, Patrick gave a great like 30-minute lunch and learn about this and the US Guatemala relationship and contextualizing why the date is what it is and it's what silver coin at that point I think and yeah, it
Yeah.
was really great.
Well, there's a very good point about the silver, the bullion quality of it. And that's something we've seen change over time. I'm old enough to remember when 25-cent pieces were made entirely of silver. And then suddenly that copper um, uh, filler started to emerge.
Hmm.
So here we have In God We Trust, which is another interesting aspect of coinage because as we now know, um, the success of any economy boils down to whether there's a shared agreement, there's trust in the currency itself. And obviously, there's a kind of moment of U.S. empire going on here. That's very interesting. So that's just an example. Now I want to shift gears and talk about sort of circulating money and money forms and tokens and ritual icons that link the investment of blood through sacrifice into ritual and cosmological renewal and reproduction to the pathways of money in the marketplace that
Mm.
circulate and basically sort of within every Yoruba town and kingdom, you have a central market uh, that is an engine of that town's growth. And it's not only makes sure the town can reproduce itself, but even to expand. And you do that by drawing commodities from the outside in and by selling your own staple produce to buyers. So right here, what you see is simply a formal homology, a formal similarity between market women bringing, in this case, probably uh, palm wine, but also these gourds contain grains very often, which are then measured out in the marketplace. So they're bringing these commodities from the outside, from the farms, and from the trees, the palm trees, into market for sale. Here you have priestesses bringing, especially the head priestess in a similar calabash, bringing what's called ashe, or the power to re-energize the kingdom, to purify it and to protect it from the outside, from these sacred groves into onto the body of the king himself, actually. So without getting too complicated about it, what we're seeing here are two systems of circulation that are linked. And they're linked by a ritual calendar that brings these priestesses into the center of the kingdom on only on market days when
Hmm.
the markets are being held every 5 days. So
Andy,
and
are
then
these when are the women coming in? Is this a ceremony for the community, or is it for like affirming the kingdom, or what is it? I'm guessing I'm asking, is it a royal or a community event?
these are our annual ceremonies. These are the big
Mm.
ones. There are a lot of sub ceremonies that are much that refer to the subunits of the communities, but these are the annual sacred festivals. Some of them are
Okay.
royal when the
Hmm.
deity belongs to the king, and some of them are civil in that, as opposed to royal, they belong to sections of the town that are ruled by sub chiefs, but they all integrate together. So
Okay.
all the big units of the kingdom are involved in a series of processions that occur over market days. So they get punctuated. Uh, but so it's the big thing. And that's a wonderful question because there are a lot of private ceremonies that involve sacrifice and exchange that have to do more with individual clients seeking protection, seeking purification, seeking sort of trying to correct course for a wayward child, things like that. And of course, always for trying to have children. And in fact, another argument I want to promote and have worked out is that the the model of circulating commodities in the marketplace and money is based on the model of circulating blood in the female body and the
Hmm.
model of fertility. And money can be both fertile and infertile. It can be hoarded and not circulated. And the market women who hoard their money are accused of being witches who consume fetuses rather than produce them. So there's a very connected system going on. Here's an example in another town right next door to the kingdom of Aede. This is the kingdom of Ishan, where money seems to be coming out of a priestess's head. And here I do want to mention just what I was talking about. Uh, Bear in mind the relationship between red and white in a lot of these exchanges. Look at how her body is wrapped, red and white. Now, the model of childbirth and the model of conception that is traditionally held among the Yoruba is that a child is formed by the white semen of a male and the red blood of a female. And the mother's blood is the strongest power of all. And the mother's blood is what contains, as the Yoruba say, awo, the secret of creating a child. And the it is also believed that any medicine man, any onishegun, traditional doctor, whose juju medicines are brought into contact with menstrual blood will never work again. So
Mm.
female blood divides into the positive reproductive blood and the negative menstrual blood. So there's a complex corporeal economy that mirrors and informs the the economy of the community. But I want to just mention two concrete things. These particular cowrie shells are associated with a trickster god, Eshu, who has who's associated very closely with opening and closing pathways. And that historically has meant that Eshu has been connected to the slave trade. And these were the currencies. They would form apo bags and strings. A string of cowries would be worth maybe 1 or 2 pennies. A bag of cowries is worth 2 pounds sterling. It's a big sack. And so, but I want to emphasize is that the money in effect is reproductive. It's generative when it combines with with blood, like semen combines with blood to create new life. And the simultaneous the the reproductive and fecundating, fertilizing dimensions of the priestly power is reflected in the red of and white of her cloth. And here's a good example of a kind of um, it's not a coin itself, but it's made out of gold. And this is another kind of contagion magic where her body is becoming fused with the value, with the intrinsic value of gold.
Mm.
And so now I'm going to focus on throughout these ritual circuits, very particular concrete moments of exchange. Just like two hands can exchange money, what happens during these ritual cycles is that what are considered to be almost like reproductive currencies that are charged with ritual power become exchanged. And here we have in the inner sanctum of the Ogboni Lodge that only initiates have access to. This is something that most outsiders would never see. We see one of the Ogboni members with pouring snail water into a shot glass, which will be drunk by and passed around by another Ogboni member. And Omiero, which is the water of the snail, it means the water is soft, is connected to curing, for example, if somebody is suffers from what's that disease where you can't your blood doesn't clot well? It's a disease of
Um,
it's
something.
hemo, yes, hemophilia.
I'm not that kind of doctor.
Hemophilia. That's it. You got it. See how we collaborate. Hemophilia. Uh, a hemophiliac, the blood will clot if you put snail water on them. So it's regarded as a cooling
Mm.
substance that any community is going to need if it's going to calm down the kinds of conflicts that can generate be generated through in marketplaces where you have economic exchange over fighting over getting cheated and getting deceived and things like that. Now you see the these bracelets which are made out of coral, which was also a money
Yeah.
form, are signs of a particular kind of chieftaincy within the Ogboni society. And so this is a very crucial moment. Now, this is not money in and of itself, but it intersects with circulating pathways of money. Here's another example. Recall the red and white that we saw in the Osayingo priestess from Ishan. Here we have red and white, the red of a kola nut, which is brought down from the north in Nigeria, and the whiteness of salt. Now, there are several proverbs that in English we work out. One who brings cola nut brings life. Another one is salt is sweet, iyodun. And it doesn't sound like much, but salt is used, not only historically has it been used as a currency, but it's also used to as a kind of prophylactic to prevent enemies from using their medicine to sabotage a festival. So when the
Mm.
priestesses walk along their pathways to bring the power and value of Ashe into the kingdom, to strengthen their markets, to strengthen their kingdom, the fertility of the crops and the soil, all of that good stuff. Um, Priestesses will drop at every threshold where medicine can sabotage their progress. They throw salt down. So, but what we see here is a kind of conception. This is a moment when the whiteness of salt and the redness of kola nut creates new life. So it's another form of reproduction, of human reproduction extending into community reproduction. So when I just want to do a footnote here, make a footnote, in many of the sort of older um, museum exhibits of African art and so-called primitive art, you'll see fertility doll or fertility object. It's very often not about simply helping a woman conceive. It can be that. These objects are used to reproduce kingdoms. And that's why there's so much power and so much concern about fertility, because without reproducing lineages that are the lineaments of kingdoms and communities, the community won't survive. So another way of thinking about it is that human reproduction is always also social reproduction. Um, Here's another kind of exchange. This is a very secret one too. This is ritual exchange with the left hand. And you might not pick that up, but normally in Yoruba land, if you touch someone, if you give or receive money with your left hand, it's considered very bad form. Leftness is
Mhm.
the hand of pollution, of dirt. Rightness is the hand of rectitude and cleanliness. Likewise, with your hand, you never eat with your left hand. Um, but Ogboni likes to reverse relationships, standard relationships, because it's a very secret society, and it can turn situations upside down when they're right side up and right side up when they're upside down. I'll say no more about that. But this is an Ogboni handshake, and it contains a lot of different things going on that I'm not authorized to talk about. But it's taking place over the vertical dimension of the landing point for a deity right there. So they're making a connection and they're exchanging something with their left hands that is extremely powerful. And it's like a ritual currency that's going to allow this festival to be successful. And then finally, I want to point out the money, the cowrie shells that have been incorporated into this the costume, the mask of an egungun masquerader. These are considered to be ancestors from the lineages, clan ancestors, lineage ancestors uh, that represent actual personages from the past. One way to understand what's happening is that these festivals bring the past into the present um, in very literal sense. They're bringing but the finery. This is a wealthy lineage. You can see this through the finery of its cloth, and the cowrie shells again evoke the historic slave trade, the Atlantic slave trade, the currencies of that. And it's probably, and comes from the kingdom of Iwo, which was involved quite dramatically in the 18th and early 19th centuries in Atlantic slavery, even after it was formally abolished by the British. So these are, and then finally, this is actually an interesting photograph because um, I thought it would be dramatic if I zoomed in. This money is in one of those calabashes that a priestess was wearing on her head. And people were putting the money into it as she processed through the community in order it's like giving a blessing. You're effectively paying your respect by you're investing in the deity in the Orisha's power, and you'll get something back. It's very transactional. And at the end of the day, at the end of the procession, the priestesses had actually accumulated a lot of money. And for those doubters who don't believe in the power of the deity, the way the priestesses talk about it is they say, well, how can you explain that we walked around a town and accumulated all this? Or how can you explain the fact that if the Orisha brought all this money to us, she doesn't exist? This is for Yemoja.
Hmm.
Yemoja. So it's a kind of ratification. It's another way of using money to establish the truth value. And these are bills, and there's some coins. These are um, the our kobo. This was at a time where the currency was much stronger than it is today. Um, Nigeria has an oil economy that goes through a boom and bust cycle, but that's a whole other. It's a related story. But in any case, money is generated through a chain of ritual conversions that begin with the spilling of blood, as in a sacrifice, and end up with the accumulation of surplus. So that's kind of the linkage between the ritual and the material economy as it plays out in the Yoruba kingdom. And I know I've thrown a lot of sort of um, impressionistic connections out at you, and but I think if we do nothing else but sort of shake things up a little bit and make us think outside of the normal boxes, I'll be happy with that.
Andy, I really appreciate the way in which this really expands the ideas that are presented in the exhibition. Like thinking about the ways in which the physical transfer between people is part of the process of meaning making, and that can take many different forms. It can have, you talked about the cowrie shells, you talked about different materials, the physical money, like it all has different kinds of symbolic value, and
Mhm.
that tweaks a little bit with depending on which context you're in, which action is performed alongside the exchange. And I think it's something that's so hard to present in a gallery space, this idea that exchange always is accompanied by physical movement, by you know chatting, by like you usually when you're making an exchange, it's not silent. There's nothing happening. It's not static. Even shopping on Amazon, you at least have to click. Um,
Right.
and so it brings a real dimensionality, I think, to those objects and asking us to imagine what all went into the movement that got the coins to have those different, the points where they are today. One question I did have for you was you did speak, I was particularly looking at that Egungun costume with the cowrie shells on it
Mhm.
and thinking, I don't know if I've ever seen an Egungun costume with contemporary money on it. Is it because they are referring to the ancestors, therefore use older money system makes sense? Or I'm just trying to like work through the aesthetic value of cowries and jangly coins seem like they would make a lot of sense on Egungun because they're like swirling around, they're making so much noise already. Why not add something that would make a physical noise? Um, and maybe someone in the audience knows if there's also jangly coins attached to Egungun. I've not personally seen one, but I don't study Egungun, so I've seen them in museums.
Well, it's a really interesting question. I do think that part of the ideology of a mask that is worn by a masquerader is that it represents the cloth of the founder.
Hmm.
So the older it is, the more power it has. And all of the sacred crowns that the recognized Yoruba kings received through, through the Oni of Ife, who's the primus
Hmm.
inter pares. It's almost like you've got the Pope and then you've got all the cardinals. So
Yeah.
but they all have to have a piece of that Pope, you know. And
Hmm.
Yoruba kings, they all trace their mythic relationship to the first king of Ile-Ife. That's the mythology. And and you have this contradiction between the fact that um, all of the crowns are said to come from Ife, but all of the very often new crowns are made, and they always take a piece of the older one and incorporate it onto the
Hmm.
inside. But so this idea of innovation and on the one hand and tradition, uh, the cowries have greater ritual value because they're older. And the older it is, the more authentic, the more powerful the ashe, the power connected to it. However, one reason you do find there's a lot of money that is given, even bills that are given to these spirits, but they're not displayed and woven into the uniforms. And I mean, one reason is that the there's been so much inflation that the actual kobo coins don't exist anymore.
Hmm.
Even a 1 naira note doesn't exist, and I think it may, but uh, there's been so much devaluation and inflation. But I think that, and you do see colonial coins on these egungun. In fact, there were
Okay.
some of them which have, for some reason, I've never understood why, the British shillings have stars of David on the back. They have the
All those stars, yeah, they're
yeah.
all over. There's a basket that's covered in them in the
I saw
show.
that. And then the hole inside is precisely to allow it to get tied.
Mm.
I know there are people who've studied this. I haven't. Um, so one does find colonial British coins on some of those
Mm.
asks, but not from the post-colonial period. So I
Okay,
didn't know
interesting.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, like this weight of history somehow.
hmm hmm Yeah, there's even a term, eton. The term for history is loaded with ritual meaning. And the older
Mm.
the eton, the older the history, the more powerful, uh, the deeper the history. And the oldest, deepest history is told through incantations because that those incantations represent the speech of the first humans. So that's the ideology of it. Yeah.
Andy, we have some great questions in the chat. I'm
Oh,
gonna
wow.
read
Good.
maybe a couple of them and we'll pick and choose because I'm having trouble. They're all great. I like this one from John. In what ways do you think contemporary African societies or diaspora communities continue to engage with coins or tokens in ritual or symbolic ways? Does the legacies of these practices inform current material culture? There's also a great one from Leanne. Given today's increasingly digital and dematerialized forms of currency, do you see echoes of these historical transformations of value, where money itself becomes a kind of cultural or spiritual sign in modern systems of exchange?
Oh,
I was thinking
damn.
about that during your intro, like how much as a kid, like when you were talking about like the magic of coins, like putting a quarter into a vending machine and getting a candy bar out, like that is magic. But now you just tap your card and it's a different kind of magic.
Wow. Well, these are two really, really
Yeah.
wonderful questions, and they're hard. Um, just with reference to,
Knowing that we have 8 minutes, just
oh,
giving us a time
oh, oh
check.
gosh. Yeah, well, I do think that the uh, the beauty of the ritual and symbolic economies within which the material economies of any society are embedded in the diasporic context is that the the ritual value, the symbolic value of a coin can be captured in a symbolic reproduction of it. So you
Mhm.
don't really need the actual objects. You can reproduce you can have surrogates, you have substitutions. There's a logic
Yeah,
of
we saw that too in objects that didn't get chosen for the exhibition. Like we
Mm,
exclusively only chose coins that were former coins. Like there's plenty of works in Fowler's collection as well that are
yeah,
reproductions of coins, like almost like sequins. They're so
yeah.
thin.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I think one of the reasons why the Yoruba Atlantic tradition is one of the strongest Afro-Atlantic traditions, regenerating communities throughout the Caribbean and Cuba and certainly Brazil and the American South and in Venezuela. I mean, it's really there are all sorts of transformations, and it's a growing economy. That is actually a growing ritual community. And it's
Mhm.
very interesting to see how representatives of that community from the US, from England, from Cuba, come back to their Yoruba counterparts in Nigeria and 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 expand the power of the Nigerian shrines because they now have global memberships. So it's very interesting.
Mm.
Um, Now, getting into the second question, you know, there's a paradox here because as currencies become less and less rooted in material value and more virtual, to the point where we have this wonderful, horrible metaphor of mining Bitcoin. So, what could be more of a material image than mining something? And yet, what could be less materialized than Bitcoin? I still,
Mhm.
honestly, I've asked economists whom I respect very much to explain it to me, and I don't understand it. I really don't. I don't. But it also, we know it consumes huge amounts of energy in order to
Mhm.
make
Mhm.
it. But there has been, if you want to sort of summarize in a overly simplistic way, a progressive dematerialization of currency over time. I remember when the stock market was linked through the internet in the late 80s and early 90s, and suddenly trades could be made in an instant. And I think the trust that attends to that kind of shift, which I think we can see crises of trust in the past when, for example, printing of paper money, is it real or not? The South Sea bubble in early
Mhm. Mhm.
18th century England in the South Seas, used where the magic of this new thing called a stock market got overvalued and then created poverty. So the very sort of progress, the progressive transformations within currencies generate crises of trust. And right now, we have, models of capitalism called casino capitalism, where, people are now looking at it as a kind of fiscal investment is a kind of gambling. It is gambling. Nobody really knows where the market's going. And going off these metallic standards. And right now, I think, the unregulated character of Bitcoin and its capacity to make millionaires and paupers in overnight
Seconds, yeah.
is I think partly illustrates what that question was really good question was getting at. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and I wonder like how we'll see it play out in visual, like, you know, 10 years, 20 years down the line. We'll stay tuned. And
Mhm.
then one final question, a topical question from Ivy. Is there a special connection with Eshu and cowries beyond them simply serving as a spiritual currency?
Well, yes. The I think that there's a historic link because Eshu, this is obviously someone who knows a little bit about Eshu who's asking this question. Um, you know, Eshu has a hook that he can catch you with, and it looks
Hmm.
like a slave coffle. And he, I think he has a special connection to a repressed historical connection to the history of Atlantic slavery, which is also manifested in the New World in Cuba, in Santeria and Regla de Ocha in particular. Um, Eshu is the left hand of Orunmila. So he's just,
Mm.
it's almost like they're two sides of the same coin. Ifa is, Orunmila is the god of Ifa. Ifa is a god of reading order and rationality in what looks like randomness. Eshu is the random number generator. And the two are on every cowrie board. You have Orunmila and you have Eshu's image
Hmm.
looking at each other. So I think that the cowrie shell, which as the object of divination, is linked very much to the history of the money form and its capacity to both build and destroy lives and communities. And it also, as they say, Eshu is the only deity who speaks through the cowries. That's another connection. He
Hmm.
talks through the cowries. And that is Eshu's contribution, I think, to Ifa divination. And um, and he figures in a lot of the divination verses as someone who has to be appeased. So I think those are some of the connections that speak a little bit to that distinguish Eshu from other orishas with respect to a special relationship to money and cowries.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to thank you, Annie, for helping us to dive deeper into the themes of exchange and to play with some puns and to share your really in-depth research. I'd love to chat more online about that gold dust stuff. As you know, the Mellon Project worked deeply with gold weight, so that sounds like it was will really play well together. So I don't know if Hannah wants to come back, but
Okay.
Right,
yeah.
I'm back. Um, Thank you all for joining us for today's program, and a special thank you to Carlee and Andrew for such a rich and thought-provoking conversation. Their insights have deepened our understanding of how coins, tokens, and counters carry meaning for far beyond their material form, connecting histories of ritual, exchange, and resistance across time and place. We hope today's talk encourages you to see even the smallest objects with fresh eyes, as vessels of memory, culture, and power. If you'd like to learn more, we invite you to visit Exchange in person at the Fowler Museum at UCLA on view through Sunday, November 2nd, or explore additional resources on our website, including a virtual story map that brings the exhibition to life. This program has been recorded and will be available soon on the Fowler website, so feel free to visit, revisit, or share it with others. And if you enjoyed today's program and would like to see more, please consider becoming a Fowler member. Your support helps us continue to present exhibitions and programs like this one. Thank you again for being with us. We hope to see you at a future program. Take care and goodbye for now. Thank you. Bye-bye.